哎，李斌，你在看我的 YouTube 吗？这个 dilution 非常的讨厌，对我小投资人是非常的不公平的。我的股票对你是垃圾吗？那我现在怎么吃饭了？哎，太讨厌了，真的。Okay, that was my little rant to Li Bin about, well, NIO is diluting the shareholders and making another offering. And if you saw my last video, I made 2 points. One is that we probably will see a little market correction, which indeed we've got. So Nasdaq has shown a correction, also dragging along Tesla and NIO. But second of all, I said I trust Li Bin that we will not get an additional offering here, at least not in the foreseeable short-term future, but I was wrong on that, so we have to talk about it. First of all, for the newbie investors, what is dilution? Well, basically explained here in a nutshell. Before the offering, you have the existing shareholder structure with a pie that is, for instance, as big as 2,000 shares, and you have shareholder 1 and shareholder 2 holding the shares, and then dilution or an offering actually means that, well, you create additional shares. So the pie is sort of getting bigger. New investors are coming in, they're buying those shares. So this gives the company money. But in the end, as an existing shareholder, the pie has just gotten bigger. So your shares have lost in value. So my last video, I said I will take Li Bin for granted because he said during the Q3 earnings call that NIO is not gonna make a new offering. And I was critical about the XPeng offering and also said like NIO probably doesn't need it because they have a nice cash balance. But then what happened is that not only did XPeng make an offering, but also increasing their offering. Also Li Auto made an offering, as well as Tesla made an offering. So basically the entire EV startup industry all diluted their shareholders, made a new offering and raising more cash. And as we can see here in this chart, none of these players actually needed to raise the cash. So Tesla had more than 14 billion in cash, NIO more than 3, XPeng almost 3 billion, Li Auto same, almost 3 billion. So actually good cash positions here, but it seems like those companies are taking advantage of the high valuations for the EV makers currently and using it in order to raise new cash for expansion and improvements. So Tesla, because they had this big market cap already, they only had to dilute their shareholders by 1% in order to raise 5 billion in cash. So after the raise, Tesla will have almost 20 billion in cash, which is massive. NIO is set to offer up to 69 million in shares, so that would be a dilution about 6.4%, and that is raising almost another 3 billion, putting NIO's cash position to 6.2 billion. XPeng already made their offering before, so they are diluting by 6%, raising 2.2 billion and ramping their cash position to a little more than 5 billion. Li Auto also 6.4% in dilution, raised 1.6 billion and, well, thereby having 4.5 billion on the balance sheet. So I think here on the chart we probably see why NIO has actually followed the others by also raising cash, because if NIO wouldn't have done that, that would actually be a competitive disadvantage in comparison to these other companies. And also if we hear what Elon Musk says about the cash raise, we can see that the entire industry here seems to be ramping up.
We're kind of debating like, should we raise money or should we not? It wasn't like a 100% sure thing. In the end, we thought, well, we can retire a lot of the debt and increase the security of the company. Probably a good thing. And for less than 1% of dilutions, probably makes sense. But we're neither here nor there on that. I think it could have gone either way.
So the money's for really debt retirement, you're saying today?
Debt retirement and I guess to have a bit more of a war chest, or I guess at the end of the day, what is money? Money is an entry in a database.
Now let's talk about, is this good or bad for NIO, and also what does it mean for the share price? Let's start with the negative, and I started a video like that. It was a broken promise to me, so I'm kind of unhappy about the fact that they talk in Q3 earnings that they're not gonna raise, and then they do raise. So I expect that Li Bin steps up in the next earnings call and actually comments on this, why they are doing it, because currently all they say is, well, they're gonna invest it in R&D and spending it in expansion plans and so on, which is fine to me. However, there are some question marks around it. Why now, and also why that big? And for me, it's important that I can trust the management on what they're saying. And with this broken promise, to be honest, that's a negative here. And in my books, I really don't like it. So furthermore, you now have to deal with the fact that the shares getting worth less. And this is by the amount of dilution. Already today, we see in the pre-market, well, at least here in the German market, we're down almost 5%, so that's roughly actually the dilution. So the shares are actually holding up quite well here, but the shares have gotten less valuable just overnight. Regarding the timing, I always said that new dilution will be coming to NIO because this is just the way startups work. They use to fund their growth through diluting shareholders and making new offerings. So that's quite normal, but I expected actually that NIO would let their shares run up into NIO Day, for instance, and make the offering then when it's actually at a higher share price. On the other hand, I think the timing here could also be positive because if you put on the management perspective here, for them, it's quite risky. They don't know what's going to happen with the share price. Would they want to wait until January? Maybe we would see a bigger market correction and then also dragging down the NIO share price. And then obviously they couldn't raise as much or would even have to dilute shareholders even more. Now, what is a really critical aspect for me to watch here now is how will the Q4 earnings be? Because this was also my critique about Axpeng Racing, first putting out really good November numbers and then the share price increases, then making the offering and possibly afterwards submitting disappointing December numbers or disappointing Q1 earnings. That would really be kind of a pump and dump scheme here. And now for NIO, the question remains the same. Are they kind of hinting thereby that the Q4 or actually the December numbers will be disappointing because otherwise, why wouldn't they just wait for the December numbers to release to get a boost in the share price and then once again have more preferable terms on how they can raise this new cash? On the other hand, just as I mentioned, take on the risk management perspective. So it kind of makes sense now that the shares have a little bit more stabilized after the recent correction and they're not in a downward trend anymore currently, that they're due the dilution now. And now it's also adding something positive here, which is the clarity and the outlook, because kind of everyone was knowing that a new dilution will be coming at one point in time. And maybe some investors have been taking a more passive stance and have been waiting for this release of the dilution. And now we have a better outlook. First of all, on the fundamentals of the company. So we have way less risk of bankruptcy. We have better outlook of what they can do with the money. So they have new money for new investments and expansion now. So in general, the positive here is the company has getting much more future-proof. But still, was there a necessity for it? No, I think Li Bin mentioned that in the earnings call. There is no need to raise cash right now, but they still did it. And I think the most important reason for that is what I've shown with the table here, that competitors are also doing this. And thereby it would be a disadvantage if NIO wouldn't also raise cash, because the competitors could certainly outspend NIO in terms of growth and expansion, marketing, infrastructure, investment and stuff like that. So it would actually be, from an investor's perspective, negative if they wouldn't have followed suit, because that would put actually the company at a risk. But now with such a big cash position, the question is whether this makes NIO lazy. For instance, we had those really nice efficiency improvements during 2020 so far because NIO was basically cash strapped and they had a bad financial situation. So this also is good for efficiencies. But now that they have so much cash at hand, maybe that makes them more lazy again and overspending in some aspects. So what would be really necessary now is to get a better picture on how they're gonna spend it. And that could be actually quite exciting. So for instance, they could spend it on something like bringing NIO houses to Europe, bringing battery swapping to Europe with the global expansion. In my views, that would be actually be cool, because that's actually leveraging NIO's unique advantage, which at least they have in China. We need to see if this is a viable concept to copy in Europe. But I rather see them investing in this area and as well in R&D for autonomous driving than actually in investing this money in their own factory, for instance. I know there's a couple of people out there who would love them to use this money for a factory. And to be frank, they could now build several factories with that money. But I still like the lean, efficient model together with JAC and would rather like them to see to spend it on sales expansion, globalization, and on NIO getting a larger footprint and scaling quicker overseas. So let's talk implications on the share price. So I have a bet going on that I bought calls for January 15th, where I say this is after NIO Day, and I'm betting that the share price will be more than $50 a share. Now that gotten just less likely with this dilution. So I may actually lose that money and my calls may expire worthless. But let's see what it means on the larger scale as a NIO investor. And so first of all, you need to understand that this is actually a process. So yesterday we have the announcement of the offering, where usually the share price goes down by the amount of dilution to be expected. So roughly 6%. That's possibly what we're going to see today in the market. And then the next step would be that NIO actually announces the pricing of the shares. So at which price will those newly issued shares be offered? If this price is way below that than the current share price, that would be an additional negative factor, and that could cause NIO to go down even further. If it's close to where they're trading today, that means that NIO is quite confident about the current share price. And if they then find investors that in the last step are closing and subscribing to this offering, and the offering goes successful, that would be the last step by which it could have some positive impact on the shares, because what investors obviously really value is certainty. So if they know now this is the price, it was successful, and now we can look ahead into the future. That's usually a good thing. So if we look back to the last time NIO made an offering, that was around the end of August. The share price also tanked around 8% back then on the day of the offering announced. And then we had a second time where the shares went down when actually the pricing and the subscription was announced. So this could happen again. I personally think that many investors may have been waiting for this and have anticipated that. So I think it could actually have a bullish feeling to it. Possibly we see a bounce back of NIO shares. I hope, and I do have the feeling that we're not getting a dramatic sell-off based on this offering announcement here. As I mentioned, there are positives and negatives to that. And for me, although I have many negatives to swallow here, I think, the positive regarding catching up with competition is overweighing here. And in the long run, this will be something good for NIO as long as they keep growing and as they keep executing on their mission. If they fail to deliver nice Q4 numbers and in the future the share price falls, that would obviously be a huge red flag for future investments in NIO and also for future capital raises. So I hope NIO would address those issues in the earnings call once again, and then really make the plans on how they're going to spend the money and execute on that. Alright, these are my views on NIO's offering, the good and the bad. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And then thank you guys for watching and enjoy the weekend.